this understanding has been around for thousands of years. And so when we die, the only thing that dies is the Annamaya kosha, which is the food sheath, which is the physical body. But all the other sheaths carry on. And I think it's called the Sukshma Sharira. That means the subtle body. There are 14 lokas altogether, 7 higher and 7 lower. So they're actually hell realms, according to this tradition also, as well as heavenly realms. And the heavenly realms, the first loka above the human is close enough to the human that we can have interactions with it. You know, they can perhaps see us or perceive us in some way, and we can perhaps contact them, and maybe that's where we go when we have a near-death experience. And then there are higher realms, which are so far removed from the human that there would be no interaction with those.
We're here with Rick Archer. He is the creator and host of Buddha at the Gas Pump, Batgap. This is a podcast created in 2009, and he's done over 700 interviews with people, ordinary people who have had extraordinary spiritual experiences. He holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in Vedic Studies from the Maharishi International University, and is the co-founder of the Association for Spiritual Integrity. Hi, Rick. How are you?
Good. I'm sitting in the woods, and it's a little cold, but I like it.
Well, seems like a great day to have a talk. I'd like to talk about the afterlife, near-death experiences, how this fits in with your Vedic studies, and also with the more recent views of science, because they seem to be rediscovering what was said in ancient scriptures. I watched your interview with Eben Alexander and Karen Newell, and they discussed the fact that consciousness can exist without a brain, without a body. And this is something that was written in the Bhagavad Gita, where it says that the soul is neither born, nor does it ever die, nor having once existed, does it ever cease to be. So right. This is known as a non-local consciousness in modern days. But this is an ancestral truth. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, well, I agree with everything you just said. And this understanding has been around for thousands of years. The Gita might be 5,000 years old. And I think a very simple analogy to help people understand it is that if we have a radio and it's playing music, and the music is not being created by the radio, it's being received and turned into audible notes by the radio. And if we take a hammer and smash the radio, the electromagnetic field doesn't go anyplace. That's the field in which the musical information is being conveyed, and the radio is just picking it up. And other radios can still pick up the same music. So like that, you know, if our body dies, it doesn't mean our consciousness dies or consciousness itself ends. And of course, the predominant modern scientific paradigm is that the brain creates consciousness. But that's like saying that the radio creates the music, creating the Beatles or creating Beethoven or something. It doesn't. It's just the transmitter, in some cases, transmitter receiver. And and I think you can interrupt me at any time, because once I get talking, I sometimes don't stop. So feel free to interrupt.
Go ahead. Finish your idea.
Yeah. I think the understanding that consciousness is fundamental, and that it is not what they call an epiphenomenon of brain functioning, a result of brain functioning, but rather that it's a fundamental reality. And it's not only fundamental to us, but it's fundamental to all of creation. I think that if society and science are based on a completely backwards, erroneous assumption, it has significant implications for the way we structure our society and the way science conducts itself. And I can give some specific examples. If we think that the environment is just sort of out there and is insentient and is just sort of dumb matter, then we're more likely to abuse it or mistreat it than if we kind of think that the environment and all of nature is an expression of consciousness, a manifestation of consciousness, just as we are. And that, as Jesus said, whatsoever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me.
Max Planck said that consciousness is the fundamental origin of everything that exists. And he talked about the matrix of consciousness, of reality. Right?
Yep. He said we can't get behind consciousness. In other words, consciousness is the innermost vantage point from which everything is viewed. Oh, and one other thing I just wanted to add, I'll just throw this in, is that, have you ever interviewed Trisha Barker?
Yes.
Yeah, she's that blonde girl from Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, I interviewed her.
Yeah, she had a cool experience, which I think typifies many near-death experiences, which is that she experienced something during her NDE when she was under anesthesia, having had a car accident, that kind of indicates that consciousness is not just a product of the brain or limited to the physical body. Some of her relatives were there, in the waiting room while she was undergoing surgery, and she saw her uncle, I believe it was, buy a Snickers bar.
Her father, I think.
Or it might have been her father. Buy a Snickers bar from the vending machine in the waiting room, and eat it. And that kind of puzzled her. She knew that her father didn't like Snickers bars or candy bars in general. And then after she came out of anesthesia, she said, "Hey, I saw you do this." Now, the waiting room was down the hall someplace. It wasn't obviously in the operating room. So that alone, and many other experiences like it, indicate that consciousness, or at least perception, can function independent of the body. And but that's just sensory perception. It goes deeper than that.
You mentioned in your Bruce Grayson interview, you mentioned the 5 koshas, or layers of human distance, and you mentioned that could explain what happens in near-death experiences and also in out-of-body experiences.
Koshas are I think the word literally means sheath, like a sheath. You can think of Russian dolls where you have smaller dolls inside the bigger dolls. And if I can remember the koshas, there's the Annamaya kosha, which is the body. Anna means food, and so it's made of food. And then there's the Pranamaya kosha, which means breath. And then the Manomaya kosha, which is mind. And the Vijnanavaya kosha, which means intellect. And then the Anandamaya kosha, Ananda means bliss. And so what this structure, this is from Advaita Vedanta, what this model illustrates is that there are subtler layers of what makes up our personality, our being. And at the very core, well, actually, it's not the very core, but at the subtlest manifest level of these layers, you have a bliss sheath. And yet beyond that is considered to be Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, the totality that is impersonal and universal. Kind of the way, I don't know, just throwing in an analogy, the way electricity is impersonal and universal, but it shows up differently according to whether it's powering a refrigerator or a cell phone or a light bulb. So when we die, the only thing that dies is the Annamaya kosha, which is the food sheath, which is the physical body, but all the other sheaths carry on. And I think it's called the Sukshma Sharira. That means the subtle body in that tradition.
It would be comparable to the astral body, right?
Yeah, astral. And the astral, and they're actually getting a little bit specific in terms of what the components of the astral body might be. Prana, mind, intellect, bliss. And so, once the physical body dies, we go on having experience, which is interesting because we're having experience without physical senses. But as we saw in the case of Trisha Barker, that's possible even when we're alive. Her eyes were not, her eyes were in her body on the operating table, but she was seeing something happening in the waiting room. So there's a subtler aspect of sense, of every sense, hearing, sight, taste, touch, smell, which apparently can operate independent of the gross body.
Not only in Trisha Barker's case, but also in Anita Moorjani, who you also interviewed, Nancy Rhines, and Evan Alexander. They visited a heavenly realm.
Yes.
Now, in ancient Vedic scriptures, they talk about the Locas, or
Yes.
planes. They different
Right.
planes, and one of these planes, the nearest to the physical plane, is where deities and deceased relatives or ancestors dwell. I think it's called the Buvar Loka, and
Yeah.
and this is where the deceased people go, and maybe this could be the place where near-death experiences take place.
Could be. As in my understanding, there are 14 lokas altogether, 7 higher and 7 lower. So they're actually hell realms, according to this tradition, also, as well as heavenly realms. And the heavenly realms, what you just said, it concurs with my understanding, which is admittedly not authoritative, but that there's a kind of the first loka above the human is close enough to the human that we can have interactions with it. They can perhaps see us or perceive us in some way, and we can perhaps contact them, and maybe that's where we go when we have a near-death experience. And then there are higher realms, which are so far removed from the human that there would be no interaction with those. You're just off on some much higher plane. But anyway, that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, well, a lot of near-death experiencers, when they reach that heavenly realm, they are told that they cannot pass certain limit.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be like another loka or another plane of existence, and that they can only be there. It's like some of them describe it as the lobby of heaven, or like an entrance,
Right. And if you went past the lobby, you'd be having a death experience, not a near-death experience.
Some of them are warned, and they are told, look, if you want to continue, you won't be able to go back.
Right.
Yeah. There's another version of NDEs that are distressful or distressing experiences, like hellish experiences. And I also saw your interview with Rob Schwartz, and you talked about these hellish experiences as self-created by the being who is having the experience, and they remain there because they feel guilty, or maybe because of their karma. What do you remember about that interview and what you said?
I don't remember what I said then exactly, but I do. I'm familiar with the concept. And have you ever heard of Jürgen Zeewe?
No.
He's a Dutch guy, and I can send you a PDF of his book, and I think you might like to interview him. I interviewed him about 10 years ago, but he's been, and we're still in touch, but he's been having I wouldn't say they're not near-death experiences. He has these experiences without having to almost die. He can just astral travel and go into all these realms, hellish and heavenly. And he also happens to be a very gifted artist. And so his earlier books, he did all the illustrations by hand, but now he's using AI to create very photorealistic illustrations of what he encounters when he travels in these realms. And his latest book it takes it from the lowest and then moves up all the way to the highest, from the hellish to the heavenly. And it's quite fascinating. And there's a whole lot of explanation that he gives along with it.
Interesting.
He also talks about this stuff as being self-created. In fact, that he said that there are these sort of darker realms where we are just kind of stuck in our deeply ingrained depression or pessimism or confusion of some kind, and so we kind of create a world which reflects that, and it's all gray and depressing and dark, raining all the time, stuff like that. And then there are heavenly realms, really nice ones that you'd like to hang out in. And maybe we could even say that whatever realm, heavenly or hellish to whatever degree, is something that we create, but it's also a shared reality.
It's like co-created, more than created,
right.
co-created.
Yeah.
Because that's what I understand, because a lot of people who have had near-death experiences have different experiences. And I interviewed once Kathy McDaniel, who had a hellish experience, and she understood that she had co-created her experience.
Yeah.
In order to learn a lesson. So I think that when people have these different experiences, for example, Evan Alexander was on top of a butterfly. So that could have been co-created. And that way, each person who has an NDE has necessarily a different experience, because he's also co-creating it, not necessarily voluntarily. It could be like unconsciously co-creating it.
Yeah. And if you think about it, maybe our whole society and our whole world is co-created. I mean, obviously we see things differently. Two people can be looking at the same sunset, and one could be all depressed and it doesn't impress them, and the other could be totally inspired by the beauty of it. But they're both seeing a sunset. You know, there's some similarity in what they're seeing. So some people argue that the world comes into existence as we perceive it, and they somehow, quote quantum mechanics to say, well, the wave becomes a particle when you perceive it. But I think that there's something a little bit more universal and independent of our individual perceptions. Otherwise, it would be like dreams, where we're all dreaming a completely different reality, and the world would be utter chaos. We wouldn't all agree that there's a stop sign or a red light or something. We have problems.
Right. There is like a pattern or a matrix. There's another thing that the ancient Hindus called it Maya, the world of illusion.
Right.
And all of this is created by this Brahman, the ultimate reality.
Right.
And each one of us is having an illusion of living this life. If time and space do not exist, then that could be the origin of this illusion. We are all thinking that we're living in time and space in 3D, but we are really not. We're really in those higher realms.
There are certain scriptures which emphasize that. Like there's something called the Ashtavakra Gita, and another an Upanishad called the which one is it? I forget. One of the Upanishads, which the whole emphasis is that the world never happened, nothing ever happened. That the whole thing is a total dream, and when you finally wake up from it, you realize, oh, it never happened in the first place. And so that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at the concept of Maya is that things exist, but not as you perceive them. So it's illusory in the sense that, and the famous example of that is Shankara's analogy of the snake and the rope. So it's semi-darkness, and the guy's walking down the road, and he thinks he sees a snake, and he jumps and he's afraid and all this stuff. But then upon closer examination, maybe with a little light, he sees, oh, it's only a rope, nothing to be afraid of. So I'm looking at trees right now, and there's something there, but it's perhaps not exactly in its reality what I'm perceiving it to be.
Well, according to quantum physics, what's really there are waves of possibilities.
Yeah.
When they are observed, they become particles. That's more or less what science is concluding now. And I remember reading about Shankara, who also mentioned that he compared the world with an illusion of a magician,
right,
who is creating all this, making the unreal appear real.
Yeah. And so what I'm getting at is that there must be some kind of cosmic mind which provides uniformity and continuity to the world. So I'm looking at a particular tree, and when I come by here tomorrow, I'll see that same tree. And if somebody else walks along right now, they'll see that tree. And if there's a squirrel climbing it, the squirrel sees the tree. So it's not like each of us is creating a completely different reality. So there must be some broader mechanism or cosmic mind, we could say, which kind of creates fundamentally the same universe, but then we all perceive the universe differently according to our level of consciousness and our perceptual wiring and capabilities.
There's another concept that the Vedic scriptures mention, is the concept of karma,
right?
And that what we do in this life will determine our future lives, or our future incarnations, or where we go after we die. Right. What do you think about karma?
Well, it helps to explain a lot of things. If you, and just for a brief definition, so karma, essentially, the word means action, and it sometimes has a negative connotation, but there's good action and there's bad action, and so on. And as the Bible says, as you sow, so shall you reap, and various other scriptures have a similar concept. So the idea is that everything we do generates and think generates an influence, and that influence ripples out and has an effect on everything, and the effect is ultimately reciprocal. it comes back to us somehow. So a person might wonder, well, how in the heck could it be organized so that, you know, all of your karma throughout your life comes back and forms the template for your next life? Who would figure that out? And in fact, in the Gita, which you quoted earlier, Krishna says that karma, that the workings of karma are unfathomable to human intellects, but cosmic intelligence can figure it out. And then some people might say, well, then cosmic intelligence is a big bully, because, you know, how about what's happening in Gaza or the Holocaust or all this stuff? How can there be a God, even if God not only allows but even is instrumental in having all these things happen to people? And I know it might sound glib to just say, well, that's the way it is, or, you know, but if you're going to have a universe, seems to me, then there have to be different qualities. There have to be pairs of opposites. There's fast and slow, hot and cold, good and bad, you know, pain and pleasure, all these different polarities. If everything were all positive, you wouldn't have any polarity. And I don't think you could have a universe. I mean, how could suns die, for instance, and form heavier elements which make up our bodies? Because when suns die, it's not a real fun day for the people who live on the planets orbiting those suns. So unfortunately, or not, there obviously has to be death, and death involves suffering, and it's just the nature of the relative world. I think
Right.
it's kind of heartless and cruel if your friend gets cancer and you say, oh, it must be your karma. That's not a very helpful way of speaking to anybody. And, you know, maybe it's true, but, you know, as one spiritual teacher once said, you know, somebody asked the spiritual teacher, well, you know, if it's people's karma to suffer, then, you know, why interfere? Why, you know, not let it happen? And she said, well, it may be their karma to suffer, but it's our karma to try to help.
The ancient teachings say that we are all God, having all these experiences. So, and it also says that duality is an illusion, and that there is no good and bad. Everything is good.
Yeah.
So it's hard to understand, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I saw your interview with Jim Tucker
All
about
right.
how children who have remembered their past lives, they prove or corroborate that reincarnation is a real thing.
Yeah. Jim Tucker was the successor or student of Ian Stevenson, who did a lot of research on reincarnation. He got old and died, so to speak. But Jim has carried on his work, and the two of them have collected perhaps a couple thousand accounts of young children who remember past lives. And they traveled all around the world. I think maybe Jim still does, corroborating these accounts. And like if some kid in India says, well, I remember being in that village and I was a woman in that life, and, you know, I had this and that detail. And they would actually go to the village and find out, you know, some evidence to support the kid's claims. And there was another kid that remembered he was having all these nightmares of being in a plane crash, and he was reenacting it in you know, with his toy plane, things like this, and you know, kept saying, you know, little man can't get out, plane is on fire, things like this. And eventually one thing led to the next, and they identified the name of the ship that he had been on, you know, aircraft carrier or something in World War II, and the kind of plane he was flying. And they actually found a photo of him, and a group photo of pilots. And you'd have to hear Jim Tucker tell the story to get all the details. But a lot of these experiences are quite convincing. And of course, you know, once you get to a certain age, you tend to forget them.
The Hindus, the ancient scriptures say that the only way to stop dying and being born again is to stop accumulating karma, right? And that way you reach nirvana, or moksha in the case of the Hindus, which is liberation from the cycle, right?
Right. And then Woody Allen said, I don't mind dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens. He also said, said, I don't want to attain immortality through my work. I want to attain it by not dying.
Yeah.
Well, the Buddhists have this thing of the bodhisattva vow, where I'm going to come back over and over again until all sentient beings are enlightened, which seems to me like it'll never happen because there's always going to be new sentient beings coming up the conveyor belt. When I was younger and not as happy as I am now, I used to really feel strongly that I just want this to be my last life. I want to get enlightened and never be reborn. And nowadays it's like, whatever God wills, how can I be most useful? I don't care if I come back or I don't care if I don't come back. I just saw a quote this morning from C.S. Lewis, the author, and he was Christian. He said something like, you don't have a soul, you are a soul. And I thought, well, that's a nice quote, but I would take it a step deeper because more fundamentally, you are God, you are Brahman, you are the totality. And then have an individual soul is kind of a more individuated expression of that totality. One example I would give is that if you look at anything like a blade of grass, and if you had a really high-powered microscope, you could look at it under the microscope and see the cells and see what was going on in the cells. You would see this amazing display of intelligence governing every little chloroform or every little bit of the cells. And if you think about it, that is happening everywhere. Anywhere you look, you could be way out in intergalactic space, and there are laws of nature, gamma rays and whatnot, and photons whizzing through, all abiding by very precise and elegant laws of nature. So when you contemplate that as just a little contemplative exercise, you realize that the whole thing is just ocean of intelligence. And we are part of that ocean. We're like the old analogy of how can a fish be thirsty because it lives in water. we're like fish and swimming in this ocean of intelligence, and a lot of us are thirsty fish because we haven't tuned into it. But if you tune into it, then you kind of partake of the bliss and fulfillment that is your inherent deepest nature.
A lot of near-death experiencers mention that when they reach that other realm, everything is alive. The grass, the tree,
the stones, everything. Another nice angle on this line of thinking that we're discussing is that, if you kind of, Jesus said, I and my Father are one. If you can tune into that reality, then, your individual will becomes an expression or reflection of divine will. And so you tend not to screw up your life so badly because you're kind of, the impulses of your life are the impulses of cosmic intelligence, not just some individual, limited, narrow vision. And things tend to go your way, generally.
Yeah. Well, I think you do know a lot about the afterlife and near-death experiences and all that. You mentioned in the beginning that you're not an expert, but I think you are.
Well, I never had a near-death experience, and
but you've interviewed so many people who have had one, and also specialists,
right?
And also, like the fact that you studied Vedic science. The other thing is that you have practiced meditation for how many years now?
Oh, about since 1968, so about 56 years or something, couple hours a day. And meditation is like a near-death experience because you're kind of going beyond your individual sensory experience. You probably heard that I think it's maybe a Buddhist saying, "Die before you die." It's like a mini death, but in a positive way. Your physiology is not in danger or anything. You're just kind of settling down to a primordial state of being, which is what people very often experience in an actual NDE.
So have you, while meditating, have you felt that you have left your body or suddenly found yourself like dreaming or something like that?
Occasionally, but it's not. That's not really the purpose of it. Because leaving your body means, okay, the body's staying here. I'm going somewhere else, and that's a thing, astral projection and everything. But it's more like your mind is settling down from an excited state to less excited states, less excited, down to a state of stillness. And like a pond, where if it's windy and there's a lot of waves, it doesn't reflect the sun very, very well. But if it becomes very windless and calm and like a mirror, then it reflects the sun and the surroundings perfectly. When you get that settled, then your neurophysiology can reflect pure consciousness very clearly. And pure consciousness is, again, your essential nature.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to take up more time. I know that you're outside and it's cold and windy.
Yeah, I'm going to take a walk and get warmed up.
Okay, so thanks a lot for your time. This was really revealing, and I'm really glad we had the time to share.
Yeah, me too. I really enjoyed meeting you, and let's stay in touch. I appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing it. We need as many people as possible doing this kind of stuff and talking about this kind of stuff.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.